It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. The purpose of my trip to the United States this time is to get to know the United States and to be known by the United States, to better understand the future direction of U.S.-Taiwan policy, and for U.S. to better understand the rising third force in Taiwan as well. This is my third time to visit Washington, D.C. The first time was in 2013, just before my election campaign for the Taipei City Mayor. The second time was in 2019, immediately after my successful re-election for Taipei City Mayor. And now it's the third time. In the recent days, I have visited Lincoln Memorial Hall, Jefferson Memorial Hall, Washington Monument, and the Capitol Hill. I know, I can understand it's a great challenge for the United States to have democracy and freedom that people here enjoy now. And after generations of efforts, the achievement has a great impact on the whole world. This time, I visit America. I find the United States is still a strong country full of dreams and hope. In the recent years, because of COVID-19 and the Russia-Ukraine war, international communication was interrupted. Many industries were heavily damaged or forced to transform. National governments became even more difficult, and due to strong competition between China and the United States, international space for Taiwan to survive was squeezed. Yes, we have many problems to face. However, we need to find the solutions, not only for 23 million population on the island, but also for regional peace, even world peace. I hope Taiwan is a pivotal area in the world, not the so-called the most dangerous area in the world, as mass media reported. More than half a century, Taiwan and the United States share the same value, so we are important to each other. We have the common interest. I hope in the future we can have more support from the United States and deepen the cooperation between Taiwan and the United States. 在经济上，我们还是要继续推动贸易自由化。美国是台湾第二大出口市场，我非常希望说美国能够协助台湾加入区域性经济组织。这有两个理由：第一，目前 ICT 产品在全世界是免税的，那如果台湾不能加入区域经济组织，所有的货品出去外销是需要课税，而 ICT 产品不用课税。这就是为什么整个台湾的产业会 shift to semiconductor industry。那这个会发生一个问题，就是我们把所有鸡蛋都放在一个篮子里面，这会造成整个经济的失衡。第二个理由中国因为跟台湾有一个 ECFA 的 agreement， 所以很多产品从台湾输出到中国大陆是免税的。那一个产品输出到其他国家要税，到中国大陆是免税，这就为什么台湾会被锁进中国大陆。我们目前大概超过 40% 的外销是到中国，所以如果台湾不能加入区域的经济组织有两个问题，一个是经济失衡，一个是台湾被吸入中国的经济体系。经济改善可以增强台湾的国防力量，那有比较坚强的国防力量才能够保证台湾的安全，还有整个东亚地区的稳定。关于两岸关系，我觉得美国国务卿布林肯讲的是3个原则是最恰当的 ：cooperate if possible, compete if needed, confront if necessary。依照他的情况去决定到底是要合作、竞争还是对抗。虽然有竞争的关系，但是我们还是有很多合作的项目，不管是2050净零碳排放、数位转型、绿色运输、区域经济，所以还是有很多可以合作的项目。我主张台湾自主两岸和平，两岸还是必须重启对话的机制。我认为交流可以增加善意，最起码也可以减少冲突。要维护台湾的安全国防还是必须的，特别是人民的心理准备。我认为民主自由还是有代价的。台湾很小，但是我希望台湾可以成为一个文明的示范，至少可以指示中国说未来发展的方向。那我将会参加台湾的总统选举我们在竞选的口号就是共荣社会、国家治理。台湾不可以再是一个分裂的国家。 我们因为意识形态让整个国家陷入分裂。如果内部都没有共识的话，我们没有办法去处理对外的两岸关系。对内关系，我们主张联合政府团结台湾；对外关系，我们主张台湾自主、两岸和平。固然台湾还是要可以自己决定自己的命运，但是我们也希望说，透过对话可以减少台海发生战争的危险。台湾人民珍惜这得来不易的民主和自由，所以我们会尽全力去捍卫它。面对未来的挑战，我们还是要共同努力，携手并进。那感谢大家的聆听哦，祝福各位平安顺心。
I maybe want to take a step back and look at, what drove you to come to the United States this time. I know you're coming to the end of a three-week trip to the United States. So could you share with us your priorities for this trip? You mentioned that you had been to the United States a couple of times before, but what makes this trip special for you?
刚才讲过啊，来美国有3个目的嘛。第一，认识美国，毕竟美国是世界上最强大的国家，也是台湾在国防安全上最重要的盟友，而且很现实的讲，美国是目前全世界敢卖武器给台湾的国家，所以对台湾的国家安全非常重要。所以作为台湾的政治上的领导者，是一定要了解美国的。第二点，我们希望从美国的角度回看台湾，因为我们常常在台湾看自己的时候有坐井观天的问题，所以我们希望从美国甚至世界的角度来看台湾。当然还有第3个目的是这样的，我们台湾民众党在台湾虽然有20% 的支持度，不过我相信99.99% 的不知道台湾有所谓的third party 第三势力，所以趁这个机会，不管是台湾民众党，或是把我自己介绍给美国的社会。
Great, thank you. On your last point of using this opportunity to both introduce yourself as well as your party, I'd like to ask a little bit about your background, particularly since you were the mayor of Taipei, which is not a small city. How does that inform your priorities as you look for the future of Taiwan?
就我当台北市长8年的经验我的认知是，人民才是政治的主体，而不是意识形态。所以在我当8年市长的任内，这样。比方说，我们会坚守财政纪律，大概台湾绝大多数的政府都预算上都是亏钱的，所以我们还会还债。那我们是公开透明，我们几乎所有的会议记录都上网公开，所以因为这样说，我们的贪污腐败就非常的少。那我们很努力的去盖社会住宅，因为高房租、高房价，既然是台湾年轻人最痛恨的事情，为什么政府不去做呢？那时候我们就很认真的去盖社会住宅。我们台北市236个学校，国小、国中、高中，全部都校园光纤网络，每个教室都有free WiFi， 然后3个 Internet port， 有85寸触碰萤幕。因为我认为这个可以使用 Internet 是人权。如果穷人不能使用 Internet， 他们在整个社会的会失去竞争力。另外一个是这样，事实上我在台北的8年的市政经验已经证明说，政党的对立不一定是政治的常态，其实我们可以超越政党，组成一个联合政府。
I think what you mentioned in terms of a coalition government, that's something that the United States also is very keen on being able to achieve, being able to work across different parties. With that, I do want to ask you a little bit about the Taiwan People's Party. What caused you to found the party, and how is your party platform different from Taiwan's other major political parties?
TPP 台湾 People Party。另外一个讲法叫 Taiwan is pragmatic and professional， 就是我们台湾民众党最大的特色。它不是强调那种 ideology， 它强调是说人民才是政治的对象，所以政治要实现在人民每一天的生活当中。我们还是有一个很强烈的这种政治信念，我们不会为了短期利益牺牲长期利益，不会为了政党利益牺牲国家利益，也不会为了少数人利益牺牲多数人利益，而且我们非常理性、务实、科学。我们也相信说，普世价值是在台湾的实现，就是台湾价值：民主、自由、多元、开放、法治、人权、关怀弱势、永续经营。我们是相信普世价值的。总结来讲，我们这个党的一个特色就是，它是强调是共荣社会、国家治理。
So Dr. Kui, you mentioned multiple times the importance of pragmatism in your party's platform, as well as the importance of focusing on Taiwan's long-term interests, as well as interests of the Taiwan people. So when you look at that and when you look at the challenges that Taiwan is facing, what do you see as the top, perhaps one to three challenges that Taiwan faces that your party wants to prioritize as part of your either platform or your presidential campaign?
其实我们台湾现在面对的问题绝对不是只有3个，一大堆，从缺水、缺电、缺地、缺工，甚至缺人才，所以我们要面对的问题太多了。几个重点第一，台湾还是要经济要重振那我认为我们台湾没有什么资源，你知道，恐怕创新才是台湾经济发展唯一的一条路。所以整个产业的创新走向那种创新产业为主的这种模式。第二点我不认为台湾在2025年可以达到汇合家园，所以我们还是要很务实的去处理台湾的能源的问题。恐怕第一件事情就是说，目前的核电厂要先继续延续下去，我们要争取时间来重新思考一下。那另外一点整个政府的效率还是要提高。我一直觉得我们的政府整个效率实在是太差了，这是我们自己内部要去处理的。不过在对外关系上面，我们还是需要美国协助台湾加入区域经济组织的。我们自己的问题我们可以自己解决，但是加入区域经济组织这件事情如果没有大国的协助，我倒觉得很困难。这个会非常严重影响整个台湾的经济发展。
I think that's a good transition to a topic that is probably a keen focus in DC, which is what is your foreign policy platform? Right, you mentioned getting Taiwan in more regional organizations, particularly on the economic side, appears to be a key priority. But what about your broader foreign policy, particularly your policy towards China as well as the United States?
我相信台湾不管哪一个政党执政大概跟美国的关系都不会改变的，因为美国还是台湾最重要的盟邦。那对中国方面是这样，我觉得我们台湾2个主要政党国民党是太顺从，民进党又跟中国大陆完全不沟通不来往我认为总是有一个最中间的一个处理方式。我们的主张是要对战争要有准备，才能够不怕战争，所以这叫备战而不畏战。
So just to be a little bit more clear about what is this middle ground that you're trying to carve out. So you're saying on one hand, you want to have more communications with China compared to the DPP, but on the other hand, you also want to continue to significantly invest in Taiwan's capabilities, including asymmetric capabilities. Is that a correct characterization of how you're trying to balance and find this middle ground?
因为我过去有办过8次台北跟上海的双城论坛，我也办过2017世大运，我有跟中国大陆交涉的经验。我认为有交流可以增加善意，最起码可以减少误解。那所以如果我们台湾跟大陆完全不讲话的话，会产生这种误解，甚至产生一种叫 misfire。为了要减低这个台海之间发生战争的危险，其实跟中国大陆还是要有 communication。
In terms of communication with Beijing, are you and the TPP willing to accept what China has outlined as some of the preconditions for dialogue for engagement, including acceptance of the 1992 consensus?
这个我也是跟大陆讲过，如果要谈判，要从那个可以谈的部分开始谈现在有一个很大的问题是，9·2共识在台湾已经污名化，所以你只要一提到这个，整个台湾人民都不高兴。我们要试着去说服大陆，你知道吗？说是不要拘泥于名称 title， 能不能不要注重它的内容 content or substance？ 其实，在我们跟中国大陆交往当中感到最困惑的就是说，中国政府对一些重要的名词都没有很清楚的 description， 包括9·2共识、一个中国、一国两制。
Great. I want to focus now on more the defense side. As you know, under the current Taiwan government, there's been quite a bit of investment in Taiwan's own defense, as well as investment in Taiwan's asymmetric capabilities. So, as you look at the challenge or threat posed from China to Taiwan on the defense and security side, what is your policy? What is your thinking about Taiwan's defense? I think you mentioned earlier that Taiwan needs to be prepared and be able to fight a war. But does that mean you will continue to sustain, if not increase, the investment in Taiwan's defense? Or are you going to further even increase that significantly? What is your specific view on the defense side?
第一点民主自由是要有代价的，在整个国防建设一样，要回到一个叫务实跟专业嘛。役期从4个月增加到1年，其实重点不是时间增加，重点是训练的内容是什么。还有一点国防经费到底够或不够，这还是要诚实的面对。 按照目前的状况，如果我们的国防预算不到 GDP 的 2% 的，我不认为那个是足够的。再来就是说，台湾单独要对抗中国，在军事上还是有困难，所以终究台湾还是加入区域的安全组织。我们主要战争的目的是让对方不敢动手，而不是说真的去跟他打仗，再决定胜跟败。最重要的从俄乌战争的经验，你知道，其实战争的心理准备很重要。你看俄乌战争已经打超过1年了，乌克兰还没有垮掉，你知道，这表示说他们有很强的这种意志力可以维持这场战争。我倒觉得我们台湾在战争意志力的准备，还需要更强的心理准备。
Maybe I can take a step back and actually ask a related question that I probably should have asked earlier, which is when we talk about the challenge that China poses to Taiwan, do you view the challenge as mainly military, or is it across the board, economic, societal? What is the main challenge that you view that Taiwan has to deal with respect to China?
中国对台湾的压力当然分2部分，一个是军事，一个非军事。那军事当然这个我们还是要做准备。那非军事是这样的不管从媒体啦、网军，它总是无所不用其极。所以说我们要建立一个更民主、更自由、更文明的社会，才有办法去抵抗这个非武力的压迫。
So I'm going to ask one final question before we open up to Q&A from those in the room. So the final question relates to Taiwan's broader foreign policy and what you view as Taiwan's appropriate role on the international stage. As you're aware, China recently took one of Taiwan's diplomatic allies, Honduras. There's discussion on what might happen with respect to Paraguay, right? So as you look at Taiwan's role internationally, how do you envision Taiwan should operate? Should Taiwan be trying to defend and expand its allies and partners, or is that something that is of lesser priority for you?
外交有很多方式比方说经贸外交、城市外交。我倒觉得这样正式的外交，台湾的确有遇到中国的压力，我们可以扩展更其他的外交来弥补那个缺点。虽然台湾有正式邦交国家只有现在剩下13个，但是台湾的 passport 在全世界都可以用，甚至比中国大陆 passport 还好用。所以这也是证明说，非正式外交的外交我们还是有很大的空间可以发展。
So I said that was the last question, but I actually have one more question before we open it to Q&A because we are relatively good on time with respect to that. So it seems like when you're talking about how you vision Taiwan's foreign policy, it seems like in addition to the middle space between DPP and KMT, you also seem to be carving out some space between where China wants Taiwan to be and where you have said the United States might want Taiwan to be. So when you think about prioritizing Taiwan's relations with the United States and China, how do you think about that prioritization?
你看北京政府给民进党就画一条线，他说如果你不接受9个共识，我就不要跟你谈。那其实北京也知道民进党不会接受他的9个共识，那意思就是说，其实基本上是北京根本就不想跟民进党谈。为什么会这样子呢？因为双方关系打坏了。一旦他已经局面弄僵了，后面就很难谈了。所以为什么我一直在坚持说有交流了可以增加善意，有善意才可以避免误解避免这种战争的风险。所以为什么一开始讲5个互相，你知道互相认识、互相了解、互相尊重、互相合作，最后那一项最难，互相谅解。就是说，你有你的困难，我有困难，能不能尝试找一个平衡点？
So maybe I can clarify my previous question a little. Is your policy, general foreign policy, to maintain equal distance between China on one hand and the United States on the other? What is your overall policy to the United States vis-a-vis China?
我每次讲一句话，就是说，台湾海峡距离是固定的，但是两边的人心的距离是会变动的，所以中国要了解这个道理。坦白讲，今天是中国大陆把台湾逼向美国那一边的，因为动不动就飞机飞来飞去，你知道吗？在这个情形下，台湾人只好一直往美国那边靠。
Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Bonny Lin, Director of the China Power Project and Senior Fellow for Asian Security at CSIS. This afternoon, I'm fortunate enough to host a special guest for this fireside chat, and it's Dr. Wen-je of the Taiwan People's Party. He's the chairman of the Taiwan People's Party, and he was also former mayor of Taipei. As you know, Taiwan is coming up to its next presidential election in January 2024, and that election will have significant consequences in terms of cross-strait relations, but also U.S.-Taiwan relations. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Ke with us today to dissect a little bit about the issues that are impacting the election, as well as to understand what are the key topics and key priorities for his party. So before turning to Dr. Ke, let me actually give a little bit of his background. So Dr. Ke was mayor of Taipei from 2014 to 2022, and he has been the chairman of Taiwan's People Party since 2019. Before becoming mayor, he was a doctor at National Taiwan University Hospital. He was also a professor at National Taiwan University College of Medicine. To many of his biggest fans, he is affectionately known as Professor Ke or Ke P. So with that, let me actually turn to Dr. Ke. Thank you again for joining us today, and let me turn you for brief opening comments on your end.
Okay, Bonny. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. The purpose of my trip to the United States this time is to get to know the United States and to be known by the United States, to better understand the future direction of U.S.-Taiwan policy, and for U.S. to better understand the rising third force in Taiwan as well. This is my third time to visit Washington, D.C. Also, the first time was in 2013, just before my election campaign for the Taipei City Mayor. The second time was in 2019, immediately after my successful re-election for Taipei City Mayor. And now it's the third time. In the recent days, I have visited Lincoln Memorial Hall, Jefferson Memorial Hall, Washington Monument, and the Capitol Hill. I can understand it's a great challenge for the United States to have democracy and freedom that people here enjoy now. And after the generations of efforts, the achievement has a great impact on the whole world. This time, I visit America. I found the United States is still a strong country full of dreams and hope. In the recent years, because of COVID-19 and the Russia-Ukraine war, international communication was interrupted. Many industries were heavily damaged or forced to transform. National governments became even more difficult, and due to strong competition between China and the United States, international space for Taiwan to survive was squeezed. Yes, we have many problems to face. However, we need to find the solutions, not only for 23 million population on the island, but also for regional peace, or even the world peace. I hope Taiwan is a pivotal area in the world, not the so-called the most dangerous area in the world, as mass media reported. More than half a century, Taiwan and the United States share the same value, so we are important to each other. We have the common interest. I hope in the future we can have more support from the United States and deepen the cooperation between Taiwan and the United States. I had better speak in Mandarin. 在经济上，我们还是要继续推动贸易自由化。美国是台湾第2大出口市场，所以我非常希望说美国能够协助台湾加入区域性经济组织。这有2个理由：第一，目前 ICT 产品在全世界是免税的。那如果台湾不能加入区域经济组织，所有的货品出去外销是需要课税，而 ICT 产品不用课税。这就是为什么整个台湾的产业会 shift to semiconductor industry。那这个会发生一个问题，就是我们把所有鸡蛋都放在一个篮子里面，这会造成整个经济的失衡。
In terms of economic and trade, we will continue to strive to promote trade liberalization. The United States is Taiwan's second largest export market, and we hope that the United States will help Taiwan to participate in regional economic organizations for a couple of reasons. First, currently ICT products in Taiwan enjoy tariff-free treatment with many countries in the world. That benefit has forced our Taiwanese industry to shift all of the resources into industries such as semiconductor. And that has made us to put all of the eggs in one basket. And if we allow that to continue for the long run, it's going to create further imbalance of industries.
第二个理由，中国因为跟台湾有一个ECFA的 agreement， 所以很多产品从台湾输出到中国大陆是免税的。那一个产品输出到其他国家要税，到中国大陆是免税，这就为什么台湾会被锁进中国大陆。我们目前大概超过40% 的外销是到中国，所以如果台湾不能加入区域的经济组织啊，有两个问题，一个是经济失衡，一个是台湾被吸入中国的经济体系。
The second situation that we are confronting with is free tariff treatment through ECFA for Taiwanese products exported into mainland China. And a direct result is that Taiwanese economy was sucked into this over-dependency of mainland Chinese market, and in some sense we're locked in this kind of situation. Currently, 40% of our export went to mainland Chinese market. And if we would allow this to continue, there will be more imbalance in our economy, and we will continue to be sucked into this trap.
经济改善可以增强台湾的国防力量，那有比较坚强的国防力量，才能够保证台湾的安全。还有整个东亚地区的稳定。
We will need to have better economic development in order to have enough financial resources to have better national defense. And with better national defense, we would have more secured environment to ensure we maintain the stability that is needed in East Asia.
关于两岸关系，我觉得美国国务卿布林肯讲的是3个原则是最恰当的 ：cooperate if possible, compete if needed, confront if necessary。不过当然是我们就是说依照他的情况去决定到底是要合作、竞争还是对抗。不过我也认为我们不需要说 confront if possible， 不需要所有事情都采用这种对抗的态度。目前台湾跟中国其实我们有相同的历史、语言、宗教、文化，但是我们今天不同的是政治体制跟生活模式。所以两岸目前竞争的是政治体制跟生活模式的不同。不过这样呢，虽然有竞争的关系，但是我们还是有很多合作的项目，不管是2050净零碳排放、数位转型、绿色运输、区域经济，所以还是有很多可以合作的项目。
I agree with Secretary of State Blinken statement that he mentioned in face of the intensifying U.S. and China relations, we should cooperate when we can and compete when possible and confront if we must. This is very much similar to my belief in my handling of the future cross-strait relations. And currently, I believe what's different between us is the political systems and people's lifestyle. But there are so many more other projects that we can still seek cooperation. For example, 2050 net zero carbon emissions, digital transformation, green transportation, and regional economy, etc. These are the responsibility that all mankind should share, and there shouldn't be any barrier for us between them.
我主张台湾自主、两岸和平，两岸还是必须重启对话的机制。我认为交流可以增加善意，最起码也可以减少冲突，减少 misfired。 这个也可以降低台海发生战争的危险。那要维护台湾的安全国防还是必须的，特别是人民的心理准备。我认为民主自由还是有代价的，所谓的就是没有白吃的午餐free lunch。
That's why I advocate Taiwan should self-govern to secure peace across the Taiwan Strait. The two sides of Taiwan Strait must restart the dialogue mechanism as soon as possible to resolve differences and avoid conflicts and to work together to maintain peace and stability. Through further dialogues, we will be able to minimize possibility for misfire. And also, we would need enough national defense power in order to secure that.
台湾很小，但是我希望台湾可以成为一个文明的示范，至少可以指示中国说未来发展的方向。那我将会参加台湾的总统选举我们在竞选的口号就是共荣社会、国家治理 （Inclusive Society, National Governance）。台湾不可以再是一个分裂的国家。我们因为意识形态让整个国家陷入分裂。如果内部都没有共识的话，我们没有办法去处理对外的两岸关系。另外，整个台湾的政府机构的效率必须提高。所以 ，Inclusive Society, National Government 是我们这样选举的主轴。
I'm hoping, even though Taiwan is a very small country, that we are able to demonstrate our quality of our citizens and our civic services. I hope that will be the future direction, and we made ourselves a role model for mainland China. And that's why I carved out our election campaign for when I run for the Taiwanese presidency to include two major pillars, inclusive society and national governance. I believe it is very important that we have a unified situation within Taiwan. We cannot allow a very divided society in Taiwan, because without a consensus from within, it is not going to be possible for us to achieve anything we would like to see internationally. And I've also seen the importance of increasing our government administration's efficiency. This is very important to help us to advance all of our agenda for our citizens.
对内关系，我们主张联合政府团结台湾过去我们政党的对立太严重了，所以只要一党执政，就会把另外一党全部从政府排除出去。我觉得我们不可以是一个分裂的国家，所以我主张联合政府，这样才能够团结台湾。对外关系，我们主张台湾自主、两岸和平。固然台湾还是要可以自己决定自己的命运，但是我们也希望说，透过对话，可以减少台海战争发生战争的危险，台海发生战争的危险。
So internally, I advocate for a coalition government because in the past, if you look at the trajectory of politics in Taiwan, whichever major party took the office, they seem to exclude the other party from participating in the political arena as much as they can. I don't think that is a way to help us to forge a mutual consensus within our country. And in order for us to move forward our agenda as a nation, it is very important to ensure we build consensus first within our nation. And in terms of our outbound diplomatic policies, I always strive the importance of cross-strait peace and stability. And to achieve that, it is important that we have this communication ongoing to ensure we are able to stay engaged.
台湾人民珍惜这得来不易的民主和自由，所以我们会为了尽全力去捍卫它。面对未来的挑战，我们还是要共同努力，携手并进。那感谢大家的聆听祝福各位平安顺心。
In face of the future challenges, we have to work hand in hand to ensure we achieve our common goals. And the freedom and democracy is always hard fought, and there's no free lunch. And we have to make sure we work together to secure that. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a very good discussions after this.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ko, for a very wide-ranging opening presentation, opening comments. I maybe want to take a step back and look at, what drove you to come to the United States this time. I know you're coming to the end of a three-week trip to the United States. So could you share with us your priorities for this trip? You mentioned that you had been to the United States a couple of times before, but what makes this trip special for you?
他的第一个问题就是这个月初您展开了为期3周的美国访问行程。那么对于这次的访问行程，您主要希望完成的工作是什么？
刚才讲过啊，来美国有3个目的嘛。第一，认识美国，毕竟美国是世界上最强大的国家，也是台湾在国防安全上最重要的盟友。而且很现实的讲，美国是目前全世界敢卖武器给台湾的国家，所以对台湾的国家安全非常重要。所以作为台湾的政治上的领导者，是一定要了解美国的。第二点，我们希望从美国的角度回看台湾。因为我们常常在台湾看自己的时候有坐井观天的问题，所以我们希望从美国甚至世界的角度来看台湾。当然还有第3个目的是这样的，我们台湾民众党在台湾虽然有20% 的支持度，不过我相信99.99% 的不知道台湾有所谓的third party第三势力，所以趁这个机会，不管是台湾民众党或是把我自己介绍给美国的社会。
Basically, this trip I would like to achieve 3 purposes. First and foremost, to get to know the United States better, because the United States has been our most important ally and the most important country in the world. It is also probably the only country that has the courage to provide arms sales to Taiwan. So far, and that's why as a political leader in Taiwan, it is very important for us to get a better understanding of the United States. Secondly, I would like to come here to seek American perspectives of Taiwan from this side. Because we ended up sometimes by analyzing Taiwan's situation from the island's perspective, and I don't think that would be sufficient. It is very important to get to know how Taiwan is perceived from the world outside. Thirdly, I'm coming here to introduce TPP, Taiwan People's Party, and myself. Currently, even though we have 20% of support in Taiwan, I believe 99.9% of the American people still do not have the understanding of who we are. So I hope to use this opportunity to introduce ourselves.
Great, thank you. On your last point of using this opportunity to both introduce yourself as well as your party, I'd like to ask a little bit about your background, particularly since you were the mayor of Taipei, which is not a small city. How does that inform your priorities as you look for the future of Taiwan?
就我当台北市长8年的经验我的认知是，人民才是政治的主体，而不是意识形态。所以做一个外科医生，你知道，我们说 TPP Taiwan People Party， 但是它其实另外一个意思是 I hope Taiwan is pragmatic and professional， 就是说我们要以一种务实跟专业的方式去处理一些我们遇到的问题。那我们的目标是什么？我 hope Taiwan is peaceful and prosperous， 所以和平繁荣是我们的目标，务实跟科学是我们的手段。所以在我当8年市长的任内，你知道。比方说，我们会坚守财政纪律，大概台湾绝大多数的政府都预算上都是亏钱的，所以我们还会还债。那我们是公开透明，我们几乎所有的会议记录都上网公开，所以因为这样说，我们的贪污腐败就非常的少。那我们很努力的去盖社会住宅，因为高房租、高房价，既然是台湾年轻人最痛恨的事情，为什么政府不去做呢？所以我们就很认真的去盖社会住宅，那也是一样我们今天我在当台北市长的时候，我们台北市236个学校国小、国中、高中，全部都校园光纤网络，每个教室都有free WiFi，然后3个 Internet port， 有85寸触控萤幕， 那国小3年级以上全部有 iPad， 那可以透过网络连接到这个图书馆。我们大概有40万册的电子书了，所以我们会保证说，因为我认为这个可以使用 Internet 是人权所以是因为如果没有，如果穷人不能使用 Internet， 他们在整个社会会失去竞争力。另外一个是这样，我最特别的地方就是我当台北市长，我的内阁你知道什么党都有，所以事实上我在台北的8年的市政经验已经证明说，政党的对立不一定是政治的常态，其实我们可以超越政党，你知道组成一个联合政府。
Through my 8 years of experience as mayor of Taipei, I've come to the conclusion that our people should be the main stakeholders. Ideology should never be our main goal or the subject matter in whatever we're doing. And also, as a surgeon, that testified how important to put people first. The name of Taiwan People's Party, in my view, is not just Taiwan People's Party. It also stands for Taiwan is pragmatic and professional, and with the approach and measures that we're taking that are pragmatic and professional, we hope to achieve our ultimate goal to make Taiwan a peaceful and prosperous place. And through that process, we have been very diligent in creating financial discipline. So when many other local governments saw deficits in their budgeting, when I served as Taipei mayor, we were able to pay off a lot of the debts. We have also believed to make our government administration to be as open and as transparent as possible. So we release all the meeting minutes in our city management, so that would reduce or any possibility for corruption. And for our younger generation, high housing prices has always been a pain point for them. That's why we put in a lot of efforts to create social or public housing to ensure that they have a place to live when they are still young. And if you look at the public schools in Taiwan, there are 236 of them. I feel a very important way to provide equality and access to education is to give them access to internet in modern days. So we have made optic fiber and Wi-Fi possible. Every classroom would have at least 3 ports to access, and we have also equipped all of the classroom with 85-inch touchpad screen. And they through the screen and through the internet access, they will have access to online library of more than 400,000 books. I think in modern times, part of the updated human rights should be the access to internet, because if you allow poor people to be denied from internet, that doesn't help them to improve their competitiveness. Also, when I serve as the Taipei mayor, if you look at my cabinet, it already included members from different political parties. I always believe that there shouldn't be any ideology that created conflicts. So I only look at who are the right people to retain. And that's why through that 8 years, I've already proved that the coalition government is possible.
I think what you mentioned in terms of a coalition government, that's something that the United States also is very keen on being able to achieve, being able to work across different parties. With that, I do want to ask you a little bit about the Taiwan People's Party. What caused you to found the party, and how is your party platform different from Taiwan's other major political parties?
TPP 啊，台湾 People Party 其实那另外一个讲法叫 Taiwan is pragmatic and professional。pragmatic and professional 就是我们台湾民众党最大的特色，就是说它不是强调那种 ideology， 它强调是说人民才是政治的对象， 所以政治要实现在人民每一天的生活当中 ，Politics should be realized in daily life. Politics should be realized in daily life of people. OK， 那我们还是有一个很强烈的这种政治信念，我们不会为了短期利益牺牲长期利益，不会为了政党利益牺牲国家利益，也不会为了少数人利益牺牲多数人利益，而且我们非常理性、务实、科学。那而且我们非常强调这种叫清廉勤政，认真工作是我们的一个文化，你知道？我们也相信说，普世价值是在台湾的实现，就是台湾价值，所以我们是相信普世价值的。民主、自由、多元、开放、法治、人权、关怀弱势、永续经营，我们是相信普世价值的。那所以总结来讲，我们这个党的一个特色就是，它是强调是共荣社会、国家治理。OK。那不同于其他政党的话，他们很强调这种意识形态，他们不太注重这种提升这种国家的效率，所以我常常批评他们就是口号太多，做的事情太少了。
As I have explained earlier, TPP not only stands for Taiwan People's Party, but also it's an acronym for Taiwan is pragmatic and professional. I think the two words, pragmatism and professionalism, are the two unique strengths of our party because we do not make decisions and we do not create our political agenda based on ideology. We believe politics should be realized in daily life of our people. And that's why whenever we create or identify our political agenda and the direction of our policies, we believe we should always put our eye on long-term interest, the national interest, and majority of our people's interest over short-term interest and minority or the political party's interest. Another strength that we have in our party is that we have always believed in being rational, pragmatic, and scientific based in our decision-making process. The way we promote to work in a way that we're serious and diligent, and to take any steps possible to avoid corruption. We believe in the universal value, and we believe that those universal values should be the Taiwan value, such as democracy, freedom, diversity, openness, sustainability, and all of those are being included in our two pillars, inclusive society and national governance. Many other governments created by other parties were not able to look at the importance of increasing efficiency. And I believe that is what I am trying to achieve through our party.
So Dr. Kui, you mentioned multiple times the importance of pragmatism in your party's platform, as well as the importance of focusing on Taiwan's long-term interests, as well as interests of the Taiwan people. So when you look at that, and when you look at the challenges that Taiwan is facing, what do you see as the top, perhaps one to three challenges that Taiwan faces that your party wants to prioritize as part of your either platform or your presidential campaign?
其实我们台湾现在面对的问题绝对不是只有3个，一大堆，从缺水、缺电、缺地、缺工，甚至缺人才，甚至到缺鸡蛋，所以我们要面对的问题太多了。不过除了解决这些，还有一点呢，像那个劳保要破产了很多这种，还有我们未来10年大概有40家大学要关门了因为少子化关系，所以事实上台湾要面对的问题很多的不过几个大重点第一，台湾还是要经济要重振那我认为我们台湾没有什么资源，你知道，恐怕创新才是台湾经济发展唯一的一条路，所以整个产业的创新走向那种创新产业为主的这种模式，这个我们要做。第二点我不认为台湾在2025年可以达到那个非核家园就是no nuclear power. I believe it's impossible. 所以我们还是要很务实的去处理台湾的能源的问题恐怕第一件事情就是说，目前的核电厂要先继续延续下去，我们要掰碳，争取时间来重新思考一下，到底台湾的能源政策要怎么处理。再来就是。 所以解决问题嘛，然后能源问题要解决，在创新的产业，那另外一点呢，整个政府的效率还是要提高。我一直觉得我们的政府整个效率实在是太差了。不过这是我们自己内部要去处理的。不过在对外关系上面，我们还是需要美国协助台湾加入区域经济组织的。我们自己的问题我们可以自己解决，但是加入区域经济组织这件事情如果没有大国的协助，我倒觉得很困难的。这个才是，但是这个会非常严重影响整个台湾的经济发展。
Actually, the challenges that we face are not just one or two. I can easily name 3 or 5. Currently, Taiwan is in shortage of water, power, land, labor, talents, and even eggs that many people probably would not think that's possible. But looking at the other problems in different levels of our society, our healthcare system might have to go through a bankruptcy if we don't manage it well. And in 10 years, on top of that, 40 universities probably or colleges will have to be closed down because we don't have enough students to participate, to go to colleges anymore. All of these have shown that it is time for Taiwan to revamp its industry structure. And at some point, since we're not blessed with a lot of resources, it is a must for us to go through industrial innovation to upgrade our industrial and economy. There was another goal set by the current administration to close down all the nuclear power plants in Taiwan by 2025. Personally, I do not think that is a realistic goal, because if you look at what is called for our industrial upgrade in Taiwan, you would need to have enough power to sustain that. Closing down the nuclear power plants is not going to help us to achieve that goal. And that's why I believe in the immediate terms, it is necessary for us to keep the nuclear power plants up and running up until we figure out a better plan. And that can help us to buy time. So the problems that we're facing in Taiwan right now, we have energy, we have the need to further our industrial innovation path, and also to increase the government efficiency. But these are more of internal issues that I feel confident that we can handle well. But in terms of support that we'll need from the outside, we would need major countries like the United States to support our inclusion in the regional economic organizations, because in order to resolve many of the other things that we're facing, further economic development is something we must have for the next phase.
Thank you. And I think that's a good transition to a topic that is probably a keen focus in DC, which is what is your foreign policy platform, right? You mentioned getting Taiwan in more regional organizations, particularly on the economic side, appears to be a key priority. But what about your broader foreign policy, particularly your policy towards China as well as the United States?
我相信台湾不管哪一个政党执政大概跟美国的关系都不会改变的，因为美国还是台湾最重要的盟邦。那对中国方面是这样，我觉得我们台湾2个主要政党，国民党是太顺从 submissive， 民进党又跟中国大陆完全不沟通不来往啊。我认为总是有一个介于 in between 最中间的一个处理方式，所以对于这种 cross-strait relationship 我们的主张是，我们还是要对战争要有准备，才能够不怕战争，所以这叫备战而不畏战。但是这样的我们就算有能力作战我们不会主动去寻求战争所以能战而不求战。那我们常常在讲说，我们台湾民众党就是不求战不畏战，那民进党是求战，国民党是畏战。
This is how I see it in terms of our foreign policy. Regardless of which political party is taking the office in Taiwan, our relations with the United States would not change. But if you look deeper between the differences between KMT and DPP, I feel KMT has always been on the submissive side when working with mainland China, while DPP stop all of the channels of communications with PRC. I personally think there is always a possibility to find a space in between the two extremes when handling the cross-strait relations. If you look at KMT, they seem to be taking all the measures to be afraid or to avoid a war, whereas DPP in its provocative terms seems to create a momentum to seek war in many people's eyes. But I would think it is better to be done in a way where we always prepare ourselves for a potential war, but we should never be afraid when such a war is happening. While at the same time, we shouldn't do anything to try to provoke and seek the war.
So just to be a little bit more clear about what is this middle ground that you're trying to carve out. So you're saying on one hand, you want to have more communications with China compared to the DPP, but on the other hand, you also want to continue to significantly invest in Taiwan's capabilities, including asymmetric capabilities. Is that a correct characterization of how you're trying to balance and find this middle ground?
所以解决问题，我每次讲说，还是要理性、务实、科学嘛，就是不要被情绪去操控。所以我倒觉得这样的，因为我过去有办过8次台北跟上海的双城论坛，我也办过2017世大运，我有跟中国大陆交涉的经验，就是说有谈话，你知道 ，talk， 总是可以找到 solution， 背得很死。那你完全不谈就没有办法。那所以常常是这样的哦，我认为有交流可以增加善意。那最起码可以减少误解。那所以，如果我们台湾跟大陆完全不讲话的话，我觉得这个万一有时候 misunderstanding 的哦，会产生这种误解，甚至产生人家 misfire 哦。所以我们还是要为了要减低这个台海之间发生战争的危险呢，其实跟中国大陆还是要有 communication 的。
I think the best way to deal with, to identify that in-between area is, again, to adopt the principles of being rational, pragmatic, and scientific in your decision making. Never allow emotions to take over when you are making important decisions. When I was Taipei mayor, we have successfully held 8 times the Twin City Forum between Taipei and Shanghai. In 2017, we successfully held the Universiade, Summer Universiade. And all these events and forums helped me to gain a lot of experiences in engaging and to keep the dialogue open with our counterparts in China. And that was a lot of experiences established for me to understand that you have to keep the dialogue open before you can identify any solution to the problem. And as a minimum, the ongoing engagement and communication would create goodwill, and if not goodwill, at least it would minimize the possibility for misunderstanding. And when we are in any possibility for misunderstanding, sometimes we create opportunities for misfire, and that's something we would like to avoid. And if we want to seek peace across Taiwan Strait and to avoid the threat, I think that's the first step we need to take.
In terms of communication with Beijing, are you and the TPP willing to accept what China has outlined as some of the preconditions for dialogue for engagement, including acceptance of the 1992 consensus?
那么在与北京的这个对话方面，如果要重启对话的时候，您是否愿意接受北京政府对于对话的一些前提，其中包括这个接受9·2共识？
这个我也跟大陆讲过，你知道吗？如果要谈判，要从那个可以谈的部分开始谈了。今天有一个很大的问题是9·2共识在台湾已经污名化，所以只要一提到这个，整个台湾人民都不高兴。我每次说用我们医学的名词，就是说，如果他已经对偏尼西林过敏了，偏尼西林allergy，那你为什么坚持要打偏尼西林？所以这个是一个我们要试着去说服大陆，你知道吗？是不是不要拘泥于名称 title， 能不能比较注重它的内容 content or substance？
In reopening any dialogue, I always believe we have to start from where we can, or areas that we can have a dialogue. If the 1992 consensus is a prerequisite, it is not going to lead us very far because the 92 consensus in Taiwan, the whole image of it has already been smeared. People don't like to hear about it, and it doesn't take you any further in any discussions. I was a surgeon, so I'm going to use a medical scenario to describe my belief. If a patient is allergic to penicillin, why would you keep insisting prescribing penicillin if it's already going to create an allergic reaction? And that's why 92 consensus, if you stick to that as a term that you want to go by, instead of looking at the actual substance, I think is not going to help us to create a dialogue.
其实，在我们跟中国大陆交往当中，感到最困惑的就是说，中国政府对一些重要的名词都没有很清楚的 description， 包括9·2共识、一个中国、一国两制，这个就好像是这样的啊。Before I buy it, of course you must let me know what it is. But now you just tell me to buy it, but I don't know what it is. This is a big problem.
The major issue right now in any talks or engagement with China is that there weren't clear-cut definitions of a lot of prerequisites that they spoke about. For example, one China policy or one country, two system. If we don't know what is included in their mind underneath those concepts, it is very difficult to strike a deal. It's just like if you want me to buy something and I don't know what I'm buying, the deal can hardly be struck.
Great. I want to focus now on more the defense side. As you know, under the current Taiwan government, there's been quite a bit of investment in Taiwan's own defense, as well as investment in Taiwan's asymmetric capabilities. So as you look at the challenge or threat posed from China to Taiwan on the defense and security side, what is your policy? What is your thinking about Taiwan's defense? I think you mentioned earlier that Taiwan needs to be prepared and be able to fight a war. But does that mean you will continue to sustain, if not increase, the investment in Taiwan's defense? Or are you going to further even increase that significantly? What is your specific view on the defense side?
第一点哦，民主自由是要有代价的，哦，没有 no free lunch， 所以是这样的，下逐你知道哈 ，deterrence， 你还是要有足够的 power 才能够下逐，所以我们还是要建立一个国防力量，还是要建立的。所以是这样的哦，我觉得我们在整个国防建设一样，要回到一个叫务实跟专业嘛，或者役期从4个月增加到1年，其实重点不是时间增加，重点是训练的内容是什么，这要解决。还有一点呢，国防经费到底够或不够，这还是要诚实的面对。按照目前的状况，你知道，如果我们的国防预算不到 GDP 的 2% 的，我不认为那个是足够的。再来就是说，台湾单独要对抗中国，在军事上还是有困难，所以终究台湾还是加入区域的安全组织。那在我们的，既然我们的国防的政策是下逐了，那在整个不对称战争的发展还是 还是要去发展，就是说，我们主要战争的目的是让对方不敢动手，而不是说真的去跟他打仗，在其中来决定胜跟败。
When it comes to democracy and freedom, I believe there is no free lunch. There is always a price tag attached. The predominant policy and strategy that we have is deterrence. However, in order for deterrence to be effective, you have to establish enough national defense power. And I would still go back to my principles of pragmatism and professionalism when it comes to national defense and security issues. Recently, we've been changing the mandatory military service from 4 months to a year. However, I think the duration of a military service is not the focus, which is not the solution. Rather, you have to look at the substance of the training in the mandatory military services. And that's why it is very critical to examine your national defense dollars and expenditure. Do we have enough to cover the kind of training that is called for to prepare us for a war? And we have to be honest about that. I don't think currently the national defense budget is only less than 2% of the Taiwanese GDP. I currently don't think that's enough to cover what we need. And also to expect Taiwan to confront China's military threat unilaterally, it is not realistic either. That is why it is very important for us to participate in regional defense organizations or platforms so that we have the capability in the asymmetric defense to help us to encounter potential threat, not to be ready to fight the war, not to encourage war, but to make sure we are able to handle that threat.
最重要的，从俄乌战争的经验里呢，其实战争的心理准备很重要。你看，俄乌战争已经打超过1年了，乌克兰还没有垮掉，你知道吗？这表示说他们有很强的这种意志力，可以维持这场战争。我倒觉得我们台湾在这个战争意志力的准备，还是需要更强的心理准备。
And the Russia's invasion into Ukraine is a very appropriate example for us to draw lessons from. I think that taught us how important your preparation, mentality preparation is in fighting and to prolong or the war. Right now, we've seen the Ukraine war linger for more than a year. But they are still fighting, and that tells you how strong people's will to fight against Russia is in Ukraine. I am not as optimistic when it comes to the mentality of Taiwanese people to stand up against a war like that, and that's why I think that will be the area that we need to also focus.
Maybe I can take a step back and actually ask a related question that I probably should have asked earlier, which is when we talk about the challenge that China poses to Taiwan, do you view the challenge as mainly military, or is it across the board, economic, societal? What is the main challenge that you view that Taiwan has to deal with respect to China?
中国对台湾的压力当然分2部分，一个是军事，一个非军事。那军事当然这个我们还是要做准备。那非军事是这样的不管从媒体啦、网军，它总是无所不用其极。所以我倒觉得是这样的就我的概念就是说，我们不太可能，就像我们 human being 人活在世界上，不太可能说完全没有细菌入侵。重点是你的 immunity 要够强。所以我倒觉得是这样的建立一个，有时候说我们要建立一个更民主、更自由、更文明的社会，才有办法去抵抗这个非武力的压迫。
China's threat will come in two ways, as I see it, military and non-military. In the military sense, it is very important to ensure that we are well prepared. But in the non-military sense, their threat can come in many forms, such as through the media, propaganda, through their hired internet influencers that create a momentum online again to be against us. But again, as a doctor, I would go back to the medical terms, if I may. You can never eliminate bacteria in the environment, but what you can do is to boost your immunity in your body. And that's why when you bring that concept to the protection of democracy, freedom, and our own civilization or civic society, we just have to make sure we are able to do all those areas well enough so that they can no longer suppress us in all those non-military pockets.
我们在面对极端气候，其实现在出现一个新的名词叫 resilient city。以前我们在面对这种洪水，你知道，我们的逻辑是堤防要加高，抽水机要加多，但是现在策略改变了。但是我面对这洪水呢，我这个城市经得起淹水啊，这策略，所以就说我们对付极端气候，我们要有 resilient city。其实同样的，你知道，我们面对这种 extreme politics， 其实我们要建立一个 we must establish a resilient society。
In terms of city management, what I've learned through a more modern concept is to build resilient cities, and especially when we are confronted with very extreme weather conditions. In the past, when we were hit by flood, what we thought about is to build a more blockage, stop the flood from coming into the city, or we placed more pumps to take the water out. However, the new way of making a city more resilient is to build the city in a way so it can absorb those excessive water and flood. And that is the same concept we should apply when managing a country. That we have to make our society more resilient so we can withstand those extreme situations.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to ask one final question before we open up to Q&A from those in the room. So the final question relates to Taiwan's broader foreign policy and what you view as Taiwan's appropriate role on the international stage. As you're aware, China recently took one of Taiwan's diplomatic allies, Honduras. There's discussion of what might happen with respect to Paraguay, right? So as you look at Taiwan's role internationally, how do you envision Taiwan should operate? Should Taiwan be trying to defend and expand its allies and partners, or is that something that is of lesser priority for you?
我们知道，就是台湾，就是最近下一个问题其实跟外交有关的，就是在外交环境受到一些挤压。我们知道台湾丧失了像洪都拉斯这样子的这个邦交国，那么很多人可能会问说，那下一个会不会是巴拉圭？那么在这个方面，您的立场是什么？您觉得是应该更强硬的去捍卫我们已有的这个邦交呢？与盟友更加强我们的联系，还是说你觉得这个并不是最重要的一个议题？
务实来讲，你知道，台湾多一个邦交国少一个邦交国，并没有实质的影响。但是这样的外交有很多方式比方说经贸外交、城市外交，我倒觉得这样正式的外交，台湾的确有遇到中国的压力。但是我们可以扩展更其他的外交来弥补那个缺点。所以虽然台湾有正式邦交国家只有现在剩下13个，但是台湾的 passport 在全世界都可以用，甚至比中国大陆 passport 还好用。所以这也是证明说，非正式外交的外交我们还是有很大的空间可以发展。
In a very pragmatic sense, our situation in foreign diplomacy would not change whether we add or remove one diplomatic tie. And there are many ways to engage in foreign diplomacy. You can establish foreign diplomacy through economic and trade activities, through city-to-city exchanges, and through the conventional sense through political ties. Of course, in terms of diplomacy through political ties, we have been suppressed by China constantly, so that our current countries with diplomatic ties with Taiwan have been reduced to 13. But if you look at the pragmatic sense, Taiwanese passport is more accessible in everywhere around the world compared to a passport from mainland China. So that tells you a lot, and that's why I believe if I were elected, our agenda would focus on areas we can engage in, all those areas that involves non-official foreign policies.
So I said that was the last question, but I actually have one more question before we open it to Q&A, because we are relatively good on time with respect to that. So it seems like when you're talking about how you vision Taiwan's foreign policy, it seems like in addition to the middle space between DPP and KMT, you also seem to be carving out some space between where China wants Taiwan to be and where you have said the United States might want Taiwan to be. So when you think about prioritizing Taiwan's relations with the United States and China, how do you think about that prioritization?
我想再追问一个问题，因为我们时间既然还够啊，因为之前已经提到了，在这个外交问题方面，您提到就是一方面需要在这个民进党以及国民党的这个外交政策当中取得一个平衡，同时也需要在中国跟美国之间的这空间之间找到一个可以下手的一个地方。那么您觉得就是在这方面，你会有一些什么样的作为，或找到一个什么样的切入点？
这是这样的哦，就有跟中国打交道的经验，你知道吗？你看哦，现在中国共产党就北京政府哦，给民进党就画一条线，他说如果你不接受九二共识，我就不要跟你谈了。那其实北京也知道民进党不会接受他的九二共识，那意思就是说，其实基本上是北京根本就不想跟民进党谈。那为什么会这样子呢？因为双方关系打坏了。一旦关系变坏，就很难去谈了。那所以一个很重要的概念就是说，不要把局面弄僵了。所以一旦他已经局面弄僵了，后面就很难谈了。所以为什么我一直在坚持说，有交通，有交友，有交流了哈，可以增加善意，有善意哦，才可以避免误解哦，避免这种战争的风险。那所以这贵了。善意还是一个很重要。那善意老讲哦，没有交流是很难去建立的。这也是我自己在处理两岸关系的时候一个很大的发现。所以老讲，今天民进党跟北京政府的问题就是说，基本上在北京政府的内心里面，他根本就不想跟民进党谈了，所以他才一开始就画那个 criteria， 就是那个。前提，如果你不接受九二共识，我就不跟你谈。可是他明明他内心就知道这个，他那个民进党政府不会接受九二共识，那你就干脆说我不想跟你谈就好了。所以这的确是一个，所以我每次说 good will 才是一个，所以为什么一开始讲5个互相，你知道吗？互相认识、互相了解、互相尊重、互相合作，最后那一项最难，互相谅解，就是说你有你的困难，我有困难。能不能我们尝试找一个平衡点？这个是必须双方要不 flexible。如果已经开始如果一开始就有敌意，你知道吗？就没有 flexibility 这个选项的，它一定是僵局
的。Through my experience, I feel that in DPP's engagement with China, there was already this premises or prerequisite of 92 consensus from Beijing government to DPP, and Beijing government was maintained a very hard line on 92 consensus. Even though I believe they know DPP is not going to accept that. So their relations are not going to move forward. But the reason there was such a premises of 92 consensus because probably PRC already know DPP is not going to have a good engagement or dialogue with them anyway. So 92 consensus in that sense can be a very convenient excuse. But once an impasse is created, it's very difficult to go back. So in my agenda, I believe we should never allow any possibility for an impasse like that to be created to begin with. To ensure that, and that's why I believe in the continuous engagement with the other side, so that you can create the goodwill, so you can reduce the misunderstanding, and to reduce the risks thereof. The five mutuals that I believe within TPP is mutual to get to know each other and to understand each other, to respect each other, to cooperate each other, and the last point, which is the most important part after we've achieved all the other four, is the mutual consideration and to put yourself in the other side's shoes, knowing that there will be difficulties in front of us. We still need to find a balance between us, and that will require extreme flexibilities on both sides with strong efforts to minimize hostility and the possibility for impasse.
So maybe I can clarify my previous question a little. Is your policy, general foreign policy, to maintain equal distance between China on one hand and the United States on the other? What is your overall policy to the United States vis-a-vis China?
那还要再澄清一下，我之前想问的问题就是，是不是就是与美国跟中国之间，你其实希望是保持一样的这个距离
？To be frank, it's a dynamic equilibrium. Since America is larger, China much stronger. China is so of course we are deviated to America. So this is a dynamic equilibrium. 我每次讲一句话，就是说，台湾海峡距离是固定的。但是两边的人心的距离是会变动的，所以中国要了解这个道理。坦白讲，今天是中国大陆把台湾逼向美国那一边的，因为你动不动就飞机飞来飞去，你知道吗？在这个情形下，台湾人只好一直往美国那边靠。
I would always believe it is a result of dynamic equilibrium. It depends on which side is stronger sometimes, but if you put that in the sense of cross-Taiwan Strait relations, I would always say the distance cross-strait is always the same, but people's mind can always change. If PRC always try to create air threats by sending their airplanes, of course, people in Taiwan would be more inclined to be closer to the United States.
Okay, great, thank you. I want to open up the floor now to questions from the audience. So yeah, if you would just need to line up there and read your question.
Yes, my name is Tina Chong. I'm with Voice of America's Chinese branch. I'd like to ask Chairman Koh, you talked about seeking balance between the Chinese condition for cross-strait, resumption of cross-strait dialogue of the 92 consensus, and you're trying to seek the balance of maintaining the status quo, although I didn't hear you say the exact wording. But what do you think the balance point is? Did you find that perfect balance point? And also, will you think to have an alternative framework for resumption of cross-strait dialogue? Thank you.
我是来自美国之音的 Tina Cheng。我想追问您刚才的问题是关于您说到如何找到一个平衡点。那这中间其实很大一部分是受到中国对于9·2共识的这个架构的这个先决条件的一个影响。当然，你也提到了希望维持这个现状，虽然您没有用维持现状的这个实际的这个字眼，但我想您的意思是这样子。那这个平衡点怎么找？您是否已经找到了？那么会有哪些替代的一些方案帮助您能够实现这一点？
第一点哦，一个国家的前途不能寄托在另外一个国家的善意上面。所以常常是这样的哦，一个完全没有实力的人，根本就没有资格上牌桌，就是你根本没有跟人家 argue 的能力。第一点，所以坦白讲，那个平衡点是这样的：当台湾太弱的时候，他根本就没有资格去找那个平衡点了。所以每次讲说要备战才能够不畏战，这还是很基本。所以台湾还是要有一定程度的国防力量，这第一点。那至于那个平衡点是这样的一样嘛第一个我们要有足够的实力，第二个还是说我们还是要想办法减少对方的敌意。我每次在讲说，过去20年台湾在国家战略上最大的错误就是我们失去了中国人民的喜爱跟甚至羡慕。我还记得20年前那个大陆上的人民是很喜欢台湾的。他们甚至到了羡慕台湾的程度，可是现在我非常清楚了，中国大陆的人民对台湾充满了敌意，甚至有一种鄙视的态度了。那如果这样的话，根本那个平衡点就很难找到了。所以这还是2点第一点，自己的实力要够强；第二，我们还是要增加对方对我们的善意。这2点做不到了，那个平衡点就会一直偏向战争过去。
I think the prospect of any nation should not be dependent on the goodwill of other nations. So that is the fundamental principle. That just tells us how important it is for us to strengthen ourselves. And if you don't have enough skills, you shouldn't play the game, as I see it. And currently, if we are perceived as a weak power, we would not even be qualified to identify or strike that balance. We will always be on the passive side. And that is why it is very important, first and foremost, to strengthen our capability in national defense, as I said, to make sure we are prepared so that we are not afraid of potential war. So increasing our strength and power is the prerequisite to be able to find that balancing point. Secondly, we have to work very hard to reduce the hostility from the other side and to increase some goodwill from the other side. If you look at the cross-strait relations 20 years back, people from mainland China were very fond of us. They even envy what we have achieved in Taiwan. But 20 years after now, I feel there was a sentiment from mainland China to no longer be fond of us and also to even look down upon us. If that is going to continue to be the case, I don't think it is possible for us to find the balancing point.
If you may, I want to follow up on your points here. So you mentioned the importance of finding a balance. You mentioned the importance of not relying on any external power for Taiwan's defense. And you also mentioned the importance of decreasing China's hostility against Taiwan, right? But as you look at Taiwan's defense, as you mentioned earlier, so far the United States is one of the few countries, if not only country, to sell arms to Taiwan, right? So right now, U.S.-Taiwan defense relations are at its strongest point ever, right? But that, even every time that defense relationship strengthens, China has an issue with it. So how do you balance that? Do you see that as potentially imposing, in your view, a limit on how much you want to strengthen defense relations with the United States?
他的意思就是说，会不会因为中国不高兴，然后你就会觉得说，与美国这边加强在军事方面或者是国防方面的合作，你就不敢做了？你会不会设一个线，就是过了这个，不然的话，好像持续就会因为我们与美国的更多的军事合作，提升我们的自我防御能力，反而导致他们不高兴，那么你就没有办法实现两边的均衡。
我们在讲到 TPP 的对外关系两个原则嘛，台湾自主，两岸和平所以我们当然希望两岸的和平但它的 bottom line 还是台湾自主所以才能知道我们要知道我们的底线，所以要让彼此都知道对方的底线是什么。如果你要侵犯我的底线，那我就只好跟你打了。
So from TPP's agenda, we've always said that we strive for Taiwan's self-governance to secure a peace cross-strait. Well, peace is very important. However, we should never forget self-governance is always more important, or takes priority over that peace because self-governance should always be our bottom line. And we have to make sure the other side is aware of our bottom line. And if the bottom line is not going to be protected, and that will be the unfortunate war to be happen.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from the audience? Sure, if there's no other questions from the audience, please.
I'd like to know that, I'd like to ask Chairman Ko. A lot of people say that for Taiwan's presidential candidate, no matter which party, they have to come to the U.S. for being for a sort of quote unquote interview. So how do you think your performance here? Did you pass the interview? How is the U.S. side respond to your policy positions? Thanks.
Before you answer this question, I would ask if there are any questions, please line up over there so I know. Elsewise, I don't know if there are any questions here. Thank you.
就是问柯主席，就是坊间有这样子一个说法，好像就是台湾不管哪一位总统候选人，如果要竞选的话呢，必须要先到美国走一遍，跟美国这边进行一些面试。我想问您，此行如果是来面试的话，您觉得您自己的表现怎么样？是不是通过了美国这里对台湾候选人、总统候选人的面试？他们的反应如何？
这样啊，其实不管我们说五个互相，你知道，不管在国内对其他政党，或在国外，不管对中国对美国，那五个互相都还是适用。互相认识、互相了解、互相尊重、互相合作，还有万一有问题的话，能不能互相谅解？那一开始就讲了，美国还是台湾最重要的盟邦然后美国是目前世界上最强的国家。那事实上，目前台湾的国防安全还是美国是能提供最大的帮助所以我们还是必须要了解美国。那其实我们在跟这一些 talk， 不要说 interview，maybe I should say discussion。在这个 discussion 的过程当中，我觉得我们都彼此增加更多的互相的认识、了解、尊重，还有将来可以合作的。我到现在为止好像还不需要互相谅解，因为我们之间并没有说我们不同意的地方所以我倒觉得这样的就我最近跟美国政府的这种 discussion， 你知道吗？他们一再表达说美国是愿意帮助台湾，而且不会介入台湾的总统选举。
I believe, regardless which counterparty we're talking about, the 5 mutuals or 5 each other principles from TPP would always apply, whether it's the engagement between Taiwan and U.S. or Taiwan and PRC. The 5 principles being to get to know each other, to understand each other, to respect each other, to cooperate with each other, and finally to give consideration to each other. And even right now, and I believe those 5 principles will apply when it comes to our relations and discussions with the United States. The United States remain to be the strongest ally and the strongest nation in the world for Taiwan. So far, in terms of Taiwan's national security and defense, the United States has been our greatest help. And instead of calling my visit and with them and meetings with them as interviews, I would rather to call them discussions with American counterparts and officials. We are not yet at the level of mutual consideration. However, I think through the discussions that I have this time, I have been reassured by the U.S. side they will continue to help Taiwan in defending ourselves, and they will strongly support Taiwan without interfering our election.
So I want to follow up on a point that you mentioned earlier, inclusive society, national governance. I wanted to extend that to what it might be if you were to come into power, if you were to become the president of Taiwan. Does that mean in your cabinet, in your ruling coalition, that you would have not only experts or representatives from your party, but also potentially experts from the DPP or KMT? Would you be willing to use leading experts or figures from across a different aisle in your government?
Of course. 事实上，我在8年的台北市长就已经这样做了。
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I've already achieved that during the 8 years serving as mayor of Taipei.
And from your perspective, how would that change sort of the dynamics compared to what you currently see in Taiwan?
那这怎么可能会影响到台湾现在的这个政治的？
最起码就是说，本来是一个 divided， 就我们本来是个分裂的国家嘛，其实透过共同合作，你知道吗？我会发现。一起 work together 本身就可以减少很多，就可以减少很多敌意。所以在我的，他们一定很难想象在我的 cabinet 内阁里面，有新党也有民进党。我的那个民政局长是民进党的，环保局长是新党，可是我看他们一起工作也没有问题。所以我很喜欢讲那个笑话，就是说。当我在台大院当医生的时候，病人送到急诊处，我们从来没有问他说你是民进党还是国民党的，所以其实用同样的心态在哈。如果我们只是问说谁可以把这个工作做好，又何必去问说这个是哪一党的？
I think exactly through a potential coalition government, we would be able to, for the first time, create this environment where people work together instead of to divide each other. And I believe the coalition is the only way forward to minimize the hostilities to each other. If you look at my cabinet members when I served as the mayor of Taipei, the Environmental Protection Agency in our cabinet was headed by someone from the new party. Our civil administration bureau was actually managed by a DPP member. Just like what I mentioned, as a doctor, as an ER doctor, you never asked which party the patient belongs to, and also the specialist that you are going to recruit to help the patient. And that's why I think it is important to look beyond the party lines.
And do you have a sense at that national level, the DPP and KMT would be willing to work with you?
No problem. Really. 我们台湾只有在选举的时候才有政党，选完就没有了。
If you know Taiwan well, political parties only exist during the election years. Once election is over, there's not that much of party lines, actually.
Okay. So let me go back to one of the topics that I think would be useful to unpack a little bit more, which is again going back to how you envision Taiwan's relationship with the United States. We had talked a bit about the relationship on the security side, on the defense side, and you also asked the United States, saying that it would be useful for the United States to help promote Taiwan or get Taiwan membership in regional organizations. What else are you seeking from the United States?
其实美国跟台湾关系一向非常好的，只要继续保持目前的大概就可以了，也不应该这样讲了，也就是说已经只要 keep going 这样就够了，因为事实上我们台湾跟美国的交往并没有任何问题，那事实上以前有争议的问题也都解决掉了，那个莱猪那件事情哦，那 Raptor Domain 的那个 poke， 其他我看。据我所知，我们现在跟美国好像没有任何问题，所以只要 keep going， 就是继续保持交流上就可以了。
I believe we have always had a very cordial relations with the United States, so we just need to keep the good things going. I don't see any major challenges between the two sides, except earlier with the import of American pork to Taiwan, and I think that's an issue that has already been resolved, so we just need to keep the current momentum going.
And do you have a sense, aside from the United States, what are other countries that would be key priority partners for Taiwan?
那么除此之外，还需要就是有哪些其他的一些伙伴或者是盟友
Japan is still how to say， 在我们离台湾最近的大国叫 Japan， 所以我一直觉得说，其实应该建立一个美日台的一个合作的平台。据说在李登辉总统时代有这一个，所以，但是后来好像李登辉总统下台以后就没有了。以前在李登辉总统的时代有一个美日台的这个国安高层轮流做动啊，每个月会见面谈一次。我倒觉得日本还是台湾在东亚地区最重要的，应该叫 partner 或 friend anyway， 我觉得日本是最重要的。
I believe Japan remains as the next largest country we have to work with, especially in Asia. And I also remember during the presidency of late President Lee Teng-hui, there was national security meetings that was taking place on a monthly basis with a rotating chairmanship among the United States, Japan, and Taiwan. However, when President Lee Teng-hui left the office, that meeting seems to disappear, didn't get to continue. I believe it is very important to bring that kind of national security regular meeting back. And through the setup of the national security meeting back then, you would know already Japan was a very important part of it. So I think we can always call Japan our partner or friend in that sense to keep us in this national security issues in control.
一个很大的理由，因为日本98% 的能源要经过台湾海峡，所以日本非常关心台湾。这也是为什么如果要找日本合作是最容易成功的。我们常常叫利害关系人 （stakeholder）。说台湾对日本来讲就是一个 stakeholder。
And there's also another reason that support our partnership with Japan in a closer sense, because 98% of energy supply for Japan would have to come through Taiwan Strait. And that's why they care about the peace across Strait very much for their own interest. And in that sense, Taiwan is a very important stakeholder for their own, for Japanese energy security. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think it's easier for us to achieve some success in partnering with Japan.
Thank you. So I didn't hear you mention either Europe or Southeast Asia, but I wanted to ask a little bit about Southeast Asia because that has been a priority for the current administration in Taiwan, partially because to think about supply chain shifts and to decrease the reliance on China economically. As we look at this economic piece, is it a priority for you to decrease Taiwan's economic reliance on China, or is that, again, another balancing act that you need to think through a little bit, that your policy isn't to decrease Taiwan's reliance on China for trade?
那么之前已经讲到了，就是台湾要在这个各个空间当中寻求一个平衡点。那么此前还没有听到您讲到对于东南亚的一些国家交流的一些政策。那么我想问一下，是不是有考虑就是在供应链方面，也可能要多元的进入像是东南亚的地区，这样子才能够减少对大陆的经济的这个依存？还是说这个也是要审慎处理的，因为怕与他们交流过多的时候有引起大陆的不满。
其实市场决定一切 ，the market determines everything。所以just follow the rule market， that's all。其实供应链的 supply chain 的 reorganization 这大概是一定会进行。特别在美中贸易大战之后，本来整个世界的供应链就会重整。所以我常常说政府你知道政府不必特别去做什么事情。政府只要问企业说 What can I do for you？ That's all。所以整个我觉得我们台湾的企业都相当灵活，他们在整个东南亚重新布局，你知道吗？我们政府唯一要做的事就是问他们有遇到什么困难，帮他解决，这样就可以了。因为我一直相信政府不会比企业更了解市场。
I believe the market should decide for themselves, and that's why my principle is always follow the market. And ever since the trade war between U.S. and China started, the supply chain has already started its own reorganization. Savvy businesses would have to find its own way, and government, as much as you attempt to do, you are ending up lagging behind. So the best thing any government can do is to ask, what can I do for you, for businesses? And Taiwanese businesses have been very savvy already in finding out different outlets in Southeast Asia. What we can do from the government perspective is to help them to resolve problems and issues if they encounter any in that process. And business is always going to be ahead of governments.
Great, thank you. So Dr. Ke, I think we are nearing the end of our session, but I wanted to ask you a final question. So what are your final stops in the United States? And since you mentioned the importance of Japan, will you also be visiting Japan at some point?
If possible.
那么在美
I
国
have time, of course, I will go to Japan.
在美国，您今天的我们访问已经快结束了。您在美国还要访问哪些地方
Houston.
Okay.
Houston.
Oh, stop by Houston.
That's stop Houston.
And you'll also go to Japan, you said, or you're not
You
going
could
to?
去日本吗
If I have time.
If
If possible.
It's possible.
If
I
possible.
have time.
If I have time, I will visit Japan.
Okay, well, Dr. Ke, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate this opportunity, and I think this is an excellent chance for you to describe yourself, your party, but also introduce you to the American public. So thank you again.
Thank you for your invitation.
Thank you.
党政焦点部分来看到，民众党主席柯文哲访美拜会政要之旅再出现突破。美国时间20号早上跟国务院亚太驻青康达会面之后，他到了下午结束智库的演讲，突然快闪赴秘密行程。随团的记者跟着柯文哲的车辆到了美国保守派智库哈德逊研究所之后，才得知柯 P 这次来会面的是被誉为最挺台的前美国国务卿庞培欧。
和美国前国务卿庞佩奥握手寒暄。
Hudson Institute, it's been an important part of the relationship between the United States and Taiwan for an awfully long time.
不时大笑畅聊政治情势，柯文哲美国时间20号在智库 CSIS 举办演讲座谈，全球直播。
那我将会参加台湾的总统选举。
明明是这一天公开最后一个行程，结束后却突然快闪。这里就是美国保守派的智库哈德逊研究所。柯文哲结束传统基金会演讲之后，就是来到这边来密会美国前国务卿庞佩奥。
我就问他说：“如果我们要选台湾总统，你有什么建议？”他说：“美国跟台湾关系也不要仅限于政治对政治，跨党派的，而且是有企业参与的，更容易跟美国政府对话。”
庞佩奥扮演起政治导师，帮柯文哲总统选战下起指导棋。但被誉为最挺台的美国国务卿任内，更是对中国强硬派。柯 P 要和中国对话，减少冲突理论，庞佩奥也认同。
绝大多数的美国政府官员，他们也不会反对说跟中国对话。民主党、共和党，大家方法不一样。但是把中国视为是一个重大威胁，这是两党的共识。
稍微采访一下吗？因为今天他们是主角。根据了解，牵线柯 P 和庞佩奥会面的就是这位徐博士，主动联系民众党，表示愿意帮忙。柯文哲华盛顿最后一晚，如愿和前国务卿会面，走出自己的外交困境。
Okay, see you in Taiwan. I'll see you there.
这是我想李明宏华盛顿报道。